and increase and broaden our understanding of food system. Today, we're going to be focusing on nutrition and health. And this is a very major, a pivotal stop in our journey of understanding sustainable food systems. And to guide us and help us through this stop and understanding, we have with us today Dr. Sigal Teter from Health High. She's a nutritionist and also epidemiologist, and will help us to understand what are healthy foods, what are nutritious food, what is the discourse that is going on, and what is the current understanding in that field. So Sigal.
Hi, thank you
for being with us today. Can everyone hear? If you can't, just come closer from the back, and you can then hear Sigal better.
Okay, yes, good afternoon. Sorry for being on Zoom. Every time I hope to come and be in person, but it wasn't possible today. I'm really excited to be here, and I thank Alon for inviting me to this course every year, and give me this opportunity. I'm going to talk about nutrition. It's a big topic, so I'm going to try to zoom in and zoom out to capture as many aspects as we can in such an introduction lecture. Okay, so
Sigal, hold on for a minute. I'll try to increase the volume just a bit.
Okay.
See if that. Can you hear in the back, or do you need it higher? There's always this. Oh, okay. So there's no need. Okay, Sigal, you can go ahead.
So in the first part, we will zoom in, learning about nutrients, their reference values, about dietary requirements, and the challenges we are facing today with all forms of malnutrition. In the second part, we will zoom out and overview the consequences of not having sufficient amount of nutrients or having too much, and how do we know that? And I'm going to talk about the cornerstones research in nutritional sciences. And finally, if we have enough time, I'll talk briefly about nutritional recommendations. And more specifically, in zooming in, we will talk about definitions of nutrients and essential nutrients, reference values of essential nutrients, and some more important issues to understand how to assess nutritional status and what is the nutritional status of the world. But before I start to zoom in, I want to show you an example of a study that was published recently, last year, and the headlines that followed its publication. Okay, so in this study, the researchers followed two large populations over many years and discovered an association between eating walnut and the risk of premature mortality. Among those who ate handful of walnut 5 times per week, life expectancy was about 1 year higher on average compared to those who did not consume nuts at all. Okay, so it's big news, right? I mean, we found the one secret to longevity. So I leave now these headlines and circle back to it at the end of my talk, but I wanted you to overview these headlines. Okay, so coming back to our food. Our food from plants or animal source contains nutrients. These nutrients are used by the body as an energy source and as support of growth to metabolic processes, physical and mental functioning, and more. And as you probably know, there are 6 classes of essential nutrients. These are the proteins, carbs, vitamin and minerals, fats or oils and fats, and water. And you probably also know that we have to get these nutrients from food. We'll get into that in a minute, but I would like you to pay attention that we have many, many non-essential nutrients that are very important to optimal functioning and good health. I mean, such as probiotic. You probably heard about the probiotic bacteria in our food, or fibers, or polyphenols, like phytoestrogen, for example, if you heard of, or lycopene, or chlorophyll, which are bioflavonoids. So our food is a complex of nutrients, and it's much more than what we can measure and define, which is the essential nutrients. And there are several ways to classify the different nutrients, and each nutrient can be characterized with more than one quality, okay? We can distinguish nutrients by their chemical composition, inorganic versus organic nutrients. The inorganic nutrients are mineral and water, and the organic nutrients are carbohydrates, lipids, and protein and vitamins. A different classification is based on quantification, the amount that we need from each nutrient. In this classification, micronutrients are the substances we need in small amounts. Only a milligram or micrograms is sufficient. And these are the vitamins and the minerals. We have another classification or sub-classification that includes trace elements and ultra trace elements separately from minerals as, again, subcategories. But for us, this classification is good enough. The micronutrients are the nutrients we need in larger amounts, hundreds of grams per day. And these are the carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Here you can see that water is part of the macronutrients, but other classifications don't include water as a nutrient. So it depends on the source. The next way to look at nutrients is whether they provide energy or not. In this case, vitamins and minerals do not provide us energy, and carbohydrates, protein, and fats do provide energy. And you can see that not all micronutrients are equal. Carbs and proteins provide 4 calories per gram, while fat provides 9 calories per gram. That means every 100 grams of fat that I eat will yield 900 calories, and every 100 carbs or protein that I eat will yield 400 calories. So this is important when we talk about energy density of food. The last classification of nutrients, and maybe the most important one, also in historical perspective, is whether they are essential, non-essential, or semi-essential, or conditionally essential. It's the same as semi-essential. Essential nutrients are nutrients required for normal body functioning that cannot be synthesized by the body. These include vitamins and minerals, fatty acids, and amino acids. Note that not all fatty acids and amino acids are essential. Only those who cannot be produced by the body. Okay, it's not moving forward. Okay. Moving to conditionally essential nutrients or semi-essential. These are certain nutrients which ordinarily are synthesized by the body in sufficient amount, and they are only essential, they're termed to be essential in specific population or specific conditions. For example, the amino acids cysteine and tyrosine are essential only among preterm infants because they don't have the ability to synthesize them. Choline is essential in patients with serious illnesses such as cancer, and glutamine and arginine are essential in catabolic condition, when the body is in huge stress, such as surgery, for example. So we know of some more conditions which require nutrients that in normal condition, we can synthesize them in sufficient amount, like alcohol, drug abuse, conditions like that. And then we have all the rest, left with the unappealing name of non-essential. But as I mentioned before, they are very important to our health.
Sigal, there is a question here. Yes.
I didn't understand the previous slide, please. I'm not familiar with those terms, and maybe you can elaborate more, or it's just like a general lecture that you don't have to know. The second and the third bullet. I'm not sure I understood.
Second and the third bullet. We're not going to go in too deep into
are
those
just an
issues.
examples. Sorry, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Sigal. Yeah.
The important thing to distinguish between essential, semi-essential, and non-essential. These are just an example of situations like preterm, like cancer, like burns, like alcoholism, that our body is not able to produce anymore these elements, these amino acids or other elements in sufficient amount, and then they turn to be essential. If I won't provide the patient in the food glutamine or choline or arginine in this condition, he will be deficient. While in normal situation, his body or her body will produce in sufficient amount these nutrients. Okay. So the third, all the four are examples of situation or nutrients that turns to be essential in specific conditions. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Okay. More questions?
Any other questions at this stage? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the non-essential, what for me is important to emphasize is they are very important to our health and function, and I will argue later on that we cannot reduce our nutrition only to nutrients and nutrients definitions of essential and how much we need. Okay, having said that, we are going to speak about reference values, and by reference values I mean the threshold of how much is enough and how much is too much. Okay, so we do want to know the specific amounts that we need to avoid deficiency. Okay, so the dietary reference intakes, or the DRIs, are family of nutrient reference values that are quantitative estimates of nutrient intakes to be used for planning and assessing diet for sufficient diet for health. They include the RDA, recommended dietary allowance, which we mostly use, but also three other types of reference values. These are the estimated average requirements, the EAR, the adequate intake, the AI, and the tolerable upper intake level, the UL. And this is what it means. Let's dive a little bit into the process of setting the reference value to the population and guide them how much they need to avoid deficiency. So if you look at the curve on the left, it shows the distribution of the need of specific nutrients in the population. Note that not all of us need the same amount. So we have variation in the population. Not all of us are the same. So the letters here, A, B, C, if you see my marker, represent three different people. And you can see that the distribution of the population is a bell curve, or the Gaussian normal distribution as we know. So if I will set the reference on the average level of the population, which you see here, estimated average requirement, the EAR, if I set the level there, then 50% of the population will get enough of this nutrient that represented here. But 50% will be in risk of deficiency. So average is not good enough for the population. The RDA, which is the recommended daily allowance, as I said, is the estimated average requirement of the nutrient plus 2 standard deviations. Setting the reference value here at the RDA line will basically cover 97.5% of the population's need. So this is how we estimate the RDA. Just take the EAR and add 2 standard deviation, and this is the RDA. This is the minimum level of intake that will avoid deficiency. But the RDA is not enough. I have minimum intake level to avoid deficiency. I need to set the level, or set also the level to avoid excessive consumption of my nutrient. So I need a safe intake range. This is the adequate intake, or the AI that you see here on the middle. And the upper intake level is the maximum level safe to consume on a daily basis. So it's set from toxicity data, but the upper limit is not set at the toxicity level line where I found toxicity in studies, because we consider safety coefficient, which is based on the toxic potential of the substance, and take large enough confidence interval to be sure that even if someone will consume the upper limit, it will not be with serious adverse effect, okay, at least on the short term. So we have enough gap from the toxic level to the upper intake level that we set. So these are the tables that we will work with, just so you to see what do we learn from the DRI's tables. You don't need to look at the specific numbers. You just need to see and I hope you see the small rows and columns at least, that you can, this is the table for vitamins, and we have a table for mineral also. And we have reference values for each vitamin by male and females, age, and for specific conditions. We have adjusted reference values for pregnancy and lactation, again, by age. Okay, so we have the RDA or DRI according to gender, age, and pregnancy and lactation. And this is the table for the minerals, same idea, and every time that you see ND, if you can see it, it's in small, that means that we still maybe not here, but here is in the tolerable, do you see the tolerable upper limit? Then you see that we don't know the upper limit of many vitamins. That means we still need more information. But when we do have it, it is the maximum dose that it is safe to consume. Okay, so we still have levels that not determined yet. Okay, so any questions on this?
Questions on this part so far?
So
Okay.
far, so great. So after understanding what are the reference values, how much is enough and how much is too much, Let's continue with the factors that affecting these reference values. And as you saw in the tables, we have specific RDA for pregnancy and lactation. Similarly, the RDA needs to be adjusted in specific conditions and for specific populations. Some of them are not mentioned in the tables. For example, nutritional requirements for hungry people or for people with obesity, or for hungry people with obesity, we have that also, are not the same. In specific diseases, we also need to adjust the reference values as, for example, in elite athletes, okay? They need some nutrients in higher doses. We also have to take into account individual differences other than sex. Sometimes we have to account for genetics or for behavioral aspect or cultural aspects or individual response to different foods, or as we mentioned, in case of substance abuse like alcohol or drug abuse. And the last thing that can affect our needs is the bioavailability. And by bioavailability, I mean the percentage of substance absorbed and physically active in the tissue. It affects solubility and absorbency of the substance. It's also affected by interaction with other food components and the whole diet composition. For example, the presence of agonists and antagonists, which increase or decrease availability. Okay, agonists increase availability, and antagonists are specific components in food that decrease availability of specific nutrients. Phytic acid found in specific plants decrease absorption of iron. This is an antagonist effect. Fat content increase absorption of fat soluble vitamins, and drug and alcohols change the absorption of nutrients in both ways, some up and some down. Also, cooking method affect bioavailability. Frying and cooking improve availability of some vitamins, for example, carotenoids in carrots, and impair availability of others, for example, vitamin C, which decrease in cooking. Okay, we mentioned age and the changing reference values. So age decreased bioavailability of all nutrients, and of course, the function of the gut is crucial for proper absorption of nutrients. So any gastrointestinal disorders also demands an adjustment to the needs of nutrients.
Hold on, Sigal, yes, question.
Just about nutrient absorption, is there any parallels between like the pH level in soil affecting nutrient uptake in plants? Do we have a pH? Is the pH in our body, or is there any?
I think I heard, but repeat so I'll be sure.
So the question was, is there like a pH range that, or a change in range that could affect bioavailability in the body? Do we know if PhD is linked with bioavailability?
So the answer is yes and no. It's complicated. In principle, yes, pH in our gastrointestinal tract and in our body affect bioavailability and solubility, but it's very stable. In gastrointestinal tract, is a different story, but I understand that you ask about the body, the inside of the body. So in some diseases, yes, but not in normal situation, okay? In normal situation, it's very stable. Okay, so we know the reference value, and now the next thing we want is to assess the nutritional status of the individual and learn about the risk factors that associated with malnutrition. And by malnutrition, I include both undernutrition and overnutrition. So it's all the forms of inappropriate nutrition. And malnutrition is a global health problem. And we are facing three major nutritional problems under this category of malnutrition. The first is hunger and undernutrition, which is insufficient calories intake. The second is micronutrient deficiency. This is the lack of essential vitamin and minerals needed for proper growth and development. And the third is overconsumption, which is an excessive consumption of calories and poor diets, diets high in sugar, refined carbohydrates, fat, and alcohol, and usually low consumption of fruit, vegetables, and fibers. So diets are considered a risk factor for non-communicable diseases, or the NCD represent non-communicable diseases. For example, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, and the diet is independent risk factor of whether someone is overweight or obese. But we should remember also that the opposite is true. Obesity is an independent risk factor for non-communicable diseases, independent of the diet quality. So it's a two-way problem. Let's say that. Okay, so let's look at some numbers updated to 2020. I've checked yesterday if there are changes, and the changes are for the worse because of the corona, but we need to have the final numbers. So this is from 2020 report of UNICEF and the World Health Organizations, and these are the consequences of malnutrition in all its forms, in the three forms that I show you. And you can see that still there are many children around the world suffering from both stunting and wasting. Do you know what stunting and wasting in children are, or should I briefly say?
Yes. We
Skip
talked
it?
about it last time.
Yeah.
Great.
So what is the difference?
Stunting is not going to their expected height,
Range, yeah.
and wasting is under.
Wait for height.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question? There was a question. Oh, okay. Wanted to answer. Okay.
Okay, great. So I skip it. One
You
thing I
can go
want to
ahead maybe with some of the numbers, I think that we have not talked about. With the
numbers.
BMI. No. Here's okay. The slide that you were just going ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to emphasize that a child can be stunted and wasted, and can be stunted with overweight at the same time. Okay, so we will come back to that in a minute. So let's talk about the prevalence of these different forms of malnutrition. And I think the actual numbers may be not so important, just the scope. 11% are calorie deficient in the world population. It's a lot. 25% are stunted and 8% are wasted. And these problems exist especially in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, but not only. All over the world, we see stunting, wasting, and malnutrition. And we face the even higher rate of micronutrient deficiency and overconsumption results, overweight, obesity, diabetes as a result of overconsumption. And the numbers here are alarming. It's over 30% of the world population suffer from some micronutrient deficiency, either if it's iron or vitamin A, and around 40% of the adults are overweight and more than 10% are obese. These are alarming numbers, and a growing number of countries facing what we call the double burden of malnutrition, the rapid rise of obesity and obesity-related chronic diseases that coexist with undernutrition and ongoing micronutrient deficiencies. And the double burden of malnutrition exists within individuals, households, and populations, and also across all life course. Okay, and the result is the nutrition-related diseases. So we zoomed in to nutrients and their meaning. Let's zoom out now and see the bigger picture. Although I think we already zoomed out a little since we look at the global picture, but it was still about looking on nutrients content of our diets. And in this part, I want to discuss why all these numbers or why these data are alarming. And I want to discuss the consequences of malnutrition in all its forms. Because nutrition is essential for health throughout lifespan, we said that. And adequate nutrition actually allows to reach full development potential. Not to mention that undernourished children are more likely to die from infectious disease, but although nutrition is important for all age groups, we need to choose one group to focus on. It would definitely be the first 2 years of life, because this will give the best chance to these children. A well-nourished child is a healthy child, fulfilling his or her potential. And also at the country level, for countries, there is a huge economic potential to invest in young ages. And how young? As young as it can be. Okay, our health begins with a healthy pregnancy. Even before birth, the health parameters already set. So we call the first 1,000 days of life, beginning before and during pregnancy, beginning with a mother. We call it critical period for optimal development and health later in life. And we know today that risk of many chronic diseases in adulthood may originate even before birth on the fetal stages. And the consequences are, as I said, throughout all the life course. And the first 1,000 days are very important, but it's not ends there. The power of nutrition continue throughout all stages of life. We know that during childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and even old ages, the impact of nutrition on our health and well-being is crucial. And the scope of influence is all the way from susceptibility to infectious diseases, all the way to cognitions or mood or mental states, better functioning, even income and social status associated with our nutritional status. Not only on the nutrition, but the nutritional status. And it's not the only determinant of social status, of course, but it's definitely an influencing factor. And I talked a lot about the power of nutrition, and we have a proof that it's really working. We have solid evidence today that many chronic diseases could be prevented or delayed or alleviated through simple life or lifestyle changes. According to the CDC, eliminating only 3 risk factors, poor diet, inactivity, and smoking, is estimated to prevent 80% of heart disease and stroke, 80% of type 2 diabetes, and 40% of cancer. Now, heart diseases and type 2 diabetes are lifestyle diseases per se. These are not genetic diseases. These are not environmental diseases. They are, but because they relate to the nutrition environment. These are lifestyle diseases. And even cancer, which is a group of diseases with different origins, and we still have 40% of lifestyle-related cancer that can be reduced or delayed. It's impressive data, I think. And out of all lifestyle factors that I mentioned, nutrition is by far the most influential on the risk of lifestyle diseases. Nutrition is the most affecting risk factors. Look at the numbers: more than smoking, more than drinking, more than inactivity, and even more than drug use. It's even more than all of them together. So I'm not saying that you should smoke and drink and use drug and eat healthy nutrition. No, it's not the case, and it's not the idea. But nutrition is definitely the key to good health. Okay, so I made some serious and decisive statements about the power of nutrition, and now I want to defend them. I want to show you on what base I make these statements and argue that nutrition is the key, the basis of good health. Move. Okay. So how do we know that nutrition and health are related? How do we know that nutrition is so important to health? So to say that, we need to understand the relationship between nutrition and health outcomes. Okay, first we have to identify the associations, and then we have to decide if these associations are causal associations. So let's try to do it together. Although I'm on Zoom, Alon will repeat what you are suggesting. I have two research questions for you. One is whether diet related to cognitive decline, and the second is which diet is recommended for optimal growth. Okay, so think about it for a minute and suggest how to plan a study that answers these questions. One of the two. You can suggest more than one study. Okay?
Okay, so think about it for a minute.
Any ideas?
Any ideas?
Identify populations with different diets and
Identify populations with different diets and compare them.
Okay, different populations with different diets. Okay, good idea. More ideas?
More ideas, yeah.
Well, the first one's easier. I would like to do a long-term study that follows a large group of people thousands of people, and through observation, comes to some kind of conclusions that create that define the relationship between diet and cognitive ability. So, but I think this one would really need to be long-term. The first one, the second one, should I think about that? I need to think about
Okay. So we would like to do a follow-up or prospective study to follow for a long time people, and what do I measure? What do I follow up on?
Yes.
Their cognitive state and their nutritional status or dietary habits, for example. Okay, another great idea. A little different. We will speak in a minute about the difference in the methodologies of the two studies you suggested.
Yeah.
Any more ideas?
Yeah.
I've studied blue zones, like areas where people are living in a world healthy, long lives without illness, and observe those diets.
I
So,
didn't do that. Yeah.
so we would study blue zones where people have longer longevity and then see the types of diets.
Okay. So
But
we
how would but how would that help you with the two questions here?
No, because blue zones are not like usually areas where people aren't experiencing cognitive declines in old age, they're remaining healthy for longer. So if you observe the diets of those people, you can glean things from that.
Okay. So then you would need to compare the cognitive decline in both populations. So it's going back to sort of like the same idea here. It's still comparing, right? Two populations.
It's comparing population, but if I understand correctly, and sorry if I'm not hearing very well, she's probably in the back. It's a recall study, right? I'll take the population with a better cognitive functioning and a population with less cognitive function, and I ask them what they ate for years ago or some sort of thing, and then compare their eating habits. And the first one was comparing population now at a certain time, what their cognitive state and what their diet. Okay, so some of you suggested follow-up, some of you suggested a survey or cross-sectional at the same time, and some of you suggested a retrospective study. But the first, let me go back a little bit. The first two basic things that I need to assess is a dietary assessment, what my study participants are eating, right? And I need to assess it accurately enough. And the second one is the exact definition of the outcome that I'm interested in. Okay, what is cognitive decline? When does it start? How do I define cognitive decline? What are the measures, the accurate measures? And when you think about optimal growth, it's even more challenging than cognitive decline, right? What are the measures of optimal growth? Who defines optimal growth? How do I know that? So this is just to emphasize the challenges that we are facing when we want to design a nutritional study or a study about the association between any health outcome and nutrition. And other important question is the questions that is I need to decide what other factors would influence my results when I measure it. Is it gender? Is it socioeconomical factors? Is it the weather? So there are many components of nutritional studies. And if I do a follow-up study, as you suggested, how long do I need to follow up? Is it from childhood, adolescence? Is it from adulthood, from about the age of 30? And then up to 60 or 70 or 90 to see the association between nutrition to cognitive decline. So it's very complicated, but I want to show you 3 study designs that we use to learn and to demonstrate these associations. So the first one is a survey or a cross-sectional, which in which I measure at the same time the cognitive state and the nutritional state. But note that I don't know the timeline. What was first, the cognitive status or the nutritional status? So if I see an association between these two, this doesn't mean causation, okay? I can tell whether I can't tell whether bad nutrition resulted in cognitive decline or the other way around. Maybe cognitive decline brings bad nutrition because I forget to eat or because I forget what is good to my health, etc., etc. So this is an association study. By no means we can conclude causation. The second study design is the observational study or the follow-up. The follow-up can be prospective or retrospective, but we will focus on the prospective study. And in this case, I start with healthy individuals and I follow them, as you suggested, for years and see who is declining and who is not, and if it is associated with his or her nutrition. So I can say at the end of the study that I have causal effect because temporality has established, and temporality is one of the factors to establish causality. But this is still not enough because the last one is intervention study, which you didn't suggested, but it is considered as the gold standard of clinical studies. Okay? In this study design, I don't only follow and document like in the follow-up study or like in the survey, I intervene and control my intervention. So part of the study participants will get one type of diet that I suspect will help to slow cognitive decline, and the other part will get different types of diet, so-called regular or control diet. And me as a researcher control the intervention and other parameters. So if I find an association between one kind of a diet and cognitive decline, I can definitely say that I have established or have not established if the results are null, causal effect. Okay, but these kind of studies, intervention studies, are very, very rare in nutrition and very hard to conduct, because think about optimal growth or cognitive decline, we need to do the intervention for many, many years, not for 1 month or 3 months or even 1 year. We are speaking about very long-term intervention studies, and we have much more observational studies than intervention. So I have to measure the outcome, which is cognitive decline or optimal growth. But now I want to focus on how do we measure the consumption of the food, or the consumption of the nutrients? How do we measure the dietary patterns? Because if you think that cognitive decline or optimal growth are hard to measure, they are. Dietary assessment is challenging as well, okay, or it's very challenging. Think about your nutrition, and if you want to record it and assess it and understand that we have a challenge here. So because of this challenge, we have several methods to assess consumption. Some of them are more subjective methods, and some of them are more objective methods. And I want to show you today just a snapshot of the subjective methods, since they are much more practical, they are much more in use, and much more suitable for epidemiological studies. So if you read studies about nutrition and health outcome, you will know exactly what have been done there. So the subjective methods are based on self-report of dietary consumption. The most complicated method in this category are food diary, in which the participants write everything they eat. We have two options here. One is simply write the meal with many details as you can, and the other one is to weigh the food before eating, which is of course more accurate but much more complicated, and the compliance of the participants is lower. The other methods are more simply to use, and each one of them has its advantages and disadvantages. The most common are the 24-hour recall and the FFQ, or Food Frequency Questionnaire. The recall questionnaire is an interview about your dietary consumption and on the day before the interview. Usually we take this questionnaire 3 times. One of them is in the weekend, 2 weekdays and 1 weekend, because we change our dietary consumption on weekends. And in this way, we get a pretty good estimation of the individual dietary pattern. But for large amount of participants, it's much more complicated to do 24-hour recall, and then we use the FFQ, or the Food Frequency Questionnaire, which is a different method. It is an estimation of the frequently consumed food. Okay, so it is a measure of long-term consumption, not one day or one day at the weekend. And it's probably the most practical methods in research, in nutritional research. And this is how FFQ looks like. It is an old version, because today most of the questionnaires are digital. But just for you to get the idea, you are asked how often you consume this list of food items, and you need to check the frequency: once a week, once a month, several times per day, and so on. This is how the full form looks. Important to mention about the FFQ is that it needs to be adjusted to each country separately, because the list of the most consumed items is different. So we have the Israeli FFQ, the American FFQ, Spanish FFQ, Japanese FFQ. Each one of them is different, maybe not in the frequencies, but in the food items that appears in the lines. And we don't have all the food in this country. We have in the Israeli FFQ 150 rows, okay? And each row represents a group of foods. So we also have adjusted questionnaires for children and for elderly and for vegan. It needs to be adjusted, the FFQ. It's not a global questionnaire, it's a global method. And this is the recall form, 24-hour recall form. It is an interview in which I ask you, what did you eat yesterday? And as I said, we don't usually rely on one interview. We will want at least 3 days to understand the pattern of nutrition. And the idea of this method is to document everything you ate yesterday. So first we do a quick list, all the things that you remember, and then we start to get into the details and make it more specific. And I try to recall more and more details about the nutrition. When did you get up? What was the first thing that you ate? How much? Did you eat something until noon? Did you drink? And what was the second thing after that you ate? And then I try to make the participant remember more when I read a list of items that he or her didn't mention, and I want to ask if they didn't eat it, and sometimes they remember on more details. So it's more complicated than the FFQ, which take about 20 minutes to answer. So this was a brief introduction of how we measure dietary consumption. Let's move to the second part. How do we learn about the associations between these dietary consumption, between nutrition and health outcomes? And I want to show you that through introducing you the cornerstones studies in nutrition. So before that, if there are questions, I'll take some questions.
Questions on this part?
Any questions?
Yeah, in the back.
It's kind of a general question. It's going to ask specifically on this thing.
Is it about the lesson or is it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm wondering, we're talking about both undernutrition and I'm wondering if obesity in itself, assuming that kind of nutrients are adequate, if just being overweight is also an indicator of like health risks, or is it all associated with nutrition, not necessarily just?
So your question is overweight, assuming that your intake of calories is adequate
And nutrition.
and nutritious, so your diets are nutritious, is that a risk factor for diseases? That was your question? You got it?
Again,
So obesity on its own is it a risk factor for diseases, assuming someone eats a very healthy diet?
yes. Of course, if you eat healthy diet and you suffer from obesity, you are less in risk, but you are still in risk because obesity itself is an inflammatory situation. Okay, we will not get into the metabolic sides of obesity, but it is an inflammatory situation to the body, which increase the risk of diseases. So it's a big argument in nutrition, by the way, in the nutritional sciences, let's say, if you can be, not you, of course, I don't see any of you, so it's not personal, but if someone can be healthy obese, okay, the common concept is that no, you are not entirely healthy as non-obese. It's better to be healthy eating obese. Okay, did I answer or did I make it more complicated?
I think,
The simple answer is no. Okay, the more complicated is it's okay.
Yeah. Any other question on parts so far? Okay, we can move on.
Maybe we will have more time at the end of the lecture. Okay, so we talked before that we have epidemiological studies, observational in nature, and we have intervention studies in which I control the nutrition. So let's start with the observational studies that contributed the most to the nutritional sciences. I want to introduce you to 3 observational studies. The first one is the Framingham study. Framingham is a small city near Boston, tiny in American scales. You can see it here on the map. Framingham is very famous, although it's a tiny city. It's very famous for this heart disease study. It was led by 2 researchers for many years, Cannell and Castelli. I hope I say their names right. Both of them were physicians, and it was launched in 1948 and still running today. Or if you asked about how long should I follow, we have already the Framingham offspring study. So it's already 3 generations under the microscope in these cities. The study was prospective cohort. That means that they started to follow a group of healthy people and then remeasure them every 2 years. And they got blood tests and other biological markers, as well as the physical assessment, as well as documenting their lifestyle behaviors, and a number of other things. Many data that was collected during the study. And a lot of what we know about diet and health, smoking and health, and other things came from the Framingham study. Why it is such an important study? Because it was the first study, the first cohort study to examine the effect of multiple factors on the incidence of heart disease. Maybe today it's common knowledge, but I mean, most of us know that high cholesterol level is a risk factor for heart disease, and that high BMI is a risk factor for heart disease. But back in the 1940s, they didn't know what causes heart disease. So they started to measure the exposure that they suspect of and the diseases that they wanted to learn about. And they set an initial follow-up of 20 years. They understood that the follow-up should be very, very long. As I said, it still continues today. So again, it wasn't common knowledge back then. There were only assumptions. And here you can see the research hypothesis. Diseases rated or heart disease rate increase with age, higher among men, hypertensive patients, higher disease rate. Think about the time and see how long we progressed since then in our knowledge. But the base of the knowledge we have today about risk factors for heart disease came from the Framingham Heart Study. So this is how we learned about the associations between weight and heart diseases, and blood pressure and heart diseases, and blood pressure and stroke, and many other risk factors that we didn't know of, and we know them again thanks to the Framingham study and thanks to the Framingham offspring study. Okay, another famous study is called the 7-country study, done by Angel Keys. This is quite a different concept. It is it's a little bit what you suggested, to take different population, because the Framingham was in the same population, homogenic in its nature population, but the 7-country study, they wanted to look at the difference between countries. Okay, not people with similar characteristics, not living in the same town, in the same environment, in the same culture, but completely different. The 7-country study was also cohort study, also aimed to learn about cardiovascular risk factors, but the aim was to learn why there are big differences in cardiovascular diseases between different countries. So one of the things that Keys observed is that there was much as 10-fold difference in rates of coronary heart diseases between these 7 countries, from the lowest to the highest. So, as a consequence, he and others started to look at the lifestyle of the people in these countries to see what might help explain these differences in heart diseases. So it started about a decade after Framingham, but it's also still running today. And it was the first study that pointed out the Mediterranean diet as healthy and preferable. Findings suggest, maybe you heard the name, Anshel Keys, sometimes we still hear about Anshel Keys, suggest that fat levels and the source of these fats differ between countries and associated with cardiovascular disease. And although it is not the whole picture of the connection or of the association between diet and fats in cardiovascular disease, it's a major part of the risk factors. Until even today, when we know that it's much more complicated, we can see that cholesterol levels are associated with heart disease and fat calories correlate with cardiovascular disease. So I say it's not the whole story, but it's relevant story of cardiovascular disease. We know today that there's this association between fat and cardiovascular disease is more complicated, and I'll expand a little bit later. So the last observational study I want to introduce today is the Nurses' Health Study. It's more recent and a very prominent study as well. And this was done by researchers from Harvard School of Public Health, and led by two famous researchers, Frank Spicer, a physician who got the study started in the 70s, and then Walter Willett, who is still the principal investigator of these studies. And Willett is maybe the most famous, iconic nutrition researcher today. Is our guru for nutritional epidemiologist. Is really a model. So this study was very interesting because what it did, it was take nurses, a cohort perspective of 100,000 of nurses, and follow them repeatedly over the years with very careful assessment of diet, health status, and other things. It's by far the largest study on women, and it was the first one who focused on women. Believe it or not, but most studies until then and even after was done mainly on men. But we know today that women and men are not the same. They have different biology, different biochemistry, different metabolism. We cannot assume that what we found in men also applies for women. So we have to test it. And today there are no more studies only on men. We have to include both men and women. So this is the first study to focus on women. And another importance of the study is all the assessment methods they developed for the study. So they developed the food frequency questionnaire, which I mentioned before, and other questionnaires and biological markers like blood tests of certain nutrients or certain things to see how diet is related to health. So we really owe these two researchers a lot of state-of-the-art methods that we have today. So a good bit of what we know about diet and health now comes from studies like the Nurses' Health Studies, and in the past from studies like the Framingham studies and the 7-country studies. And here you can see more advanced, thanks to the Nurses' Health Study, more advanced analysis of the association between dietary fat consumption and heart disease. But we know even more now, even more than this picture. In this study, or in this analysis, they were able to separate different types of fat. Okay, if the 7-country study just associate fats, oils and fats, all kinds of fats to heart disease, we can learn from this graph that trans fat and saturated fat increase risk of coronary heart disease. Okay, and mono unsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat decrease risk of heart disease. So it's not fat CVD or coronary vascular coronary heart disease. It's more complicated. It's depend which kind of fat. But this is not the whole story. It's just another layer of understanding of the relationship between fats and CVD. Because if you see here, the polyunsaturated, which is the lower line, okay, the orange line, lowers the rate of cardiovascular diseases more than mono unsaturated fat. But turns out it's not exactly like that, because it depends on which polyunsaturated we test. It can be omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acid, which decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease, or it can be omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid, which is a different story. So here too, without a specific resolution of the type of fatty acids, I can come to a wrong conclusion. And another insight from the
Question here, Sigal?
Yes.
Yeah.
So is it possible to explain this slide in Hebrew as well? I didn't understand.
No, in Hebrew.
So
Afterwards,
what is the-
I can explain to you afterwards.
Okay, I'm not sure, I didn't understand.
Coronary heart disease, yeah. Coronary heart disease is heart disease by changes in the coronaries, or chemo. Yes, that's the word. Okay.
some question to me to explain more about this graph.
Any questions?
Yes, you can explain it again.
Yeah, we see here the change in coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease, the change in okay, the תחלואה, אלון ברק לי תחלואה. Okay. Morbidity, yeah, morbidity, and the association for the specific type of fat consumption. So we have the trans, which are industrial, artificial fats, all the hydrogenated fats. These are the trans fatty acid. They increase, you see the pink line, increase the most the prevalence of CHD, right? The pink line is okay, increase the morbidity of CHD. And then we see the saturated fat, which come from animal-based products like butter, like cream cheese, like meat. These foods contains saturated fatty acid, and we see also that consumption of saturated fatty acid as percent, by the way, of the energy of the diet also increase the risk of coronary heart diseases. So these are the pink and the green lines. Now we have the blue and the orange line, which represent mono unsaturated fatty acid, which originated from olive oil, from avocado, from walnut, in part, walnut, because walnut also has a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acid, but peanuts. Okay, peanuts are more mono than poly, and then polyunsaturated, which can come from a lot of different sources, and that's what makes it so complicated. But we see that as a group, polyunsaturated decrease heart disease rate more than monounsaturated, right? But I try to explain that this story is not the whole story. It's a little bit more complicated, because if you if you separate polyunsaturated fatty acid to different types, then you see certain types that increase the risk and certain types that decrease the risk. So it depends which polyunsaturated. Okay? Better now?
Yeah, we can go on.
Okay. So another insight from the Nurses' Health Study is the association between sugar-sweetened beverages and type 2 diabetes. Again, for us today, it is intuitive and common knowledge, but it needs to be proven in an observational study in the past, so we can claim it, and it was one of the first evidence to point this association. Okay, so the last study I want to introduce today is an intervention study, which I mentioned earlier as the highest in the hierarchy of studies, because here I control the exposure and I intervene. I control all the elements of the study. So the most important intervention study, at least the biggest today, is the PREDIMED study, which is a Spanish study in over 7,000 participants. We think about doing an intervention, nutritional intervention in 7,000 participants. And this study compares Mediterranean diet with Western low-fat diet. Okay, low-fat diet because we saw the association between fats and cardiovascular diseases. So let's take the low-fat diet and compare it to Mediterranean diet. Its aim was to describe the causation path between nutrition and cardiovascular diseases. And its results presented a solid evidence, okay, that the Mediterranean diet that we saw also in the 7 countries decreases cardiovascular morbidity in high-risk individuals. And the study, like all the good ones that we saw, continues with the PREDIMED Plus until today. So this is just to show you the dietary patterns the participant received. Doesn't matter to see all the details, just to learn that they didn't give menu to the participants. You can't give for 7 and 8 and 10 years menu. You give dietary pattern, like eat more than this and less than that. Don't go over 1 drink per day. Don't try to consume more than 4 tablespoons of olive oil per day. This is not a menu, but a dietary pattern. And they compared, as we said, Mediterranean diet to Western diet, but 2 types of Mediterranean diet. One with extra or virgin olive oil, and one with extra portion of nut, the whole nuts that I'll come back to in a minute. So this was to test if one of them is better than the other in reducing the risk. So what is better to consume, walnut or olive oil? Other than that, the Mediterranean diet's pattern were the same. So the result demonstrated that the answer is no. There is no difference between olive oil and walnut. They were both equally effective in reducing the risk of myocardial infarction, a stroke, or death from cardiovascular causes. Okay, and they are with different fatty acid composite, olive oil and walnut, and that's the reason they want to elaborate these differences. In a minute, I'll come back to our study from the beginning, and we'll speak a little bit more about that. Okay, so now let's talk about what is a healthy diet and what should we eat, because the PREDIMED used the Mediterranean diet, which is the most studied and evidence-based healthy diet. And we have a growing amount of literature showing that the Mediterranean diet protects against a number of diseases. Maybe I focus today on cardiovascular diseases, but we have many studies about a lot of non-communicable diseases. And the Mediterranean diet is high in olive oil, grains or whole grains. It's important to differentiate fruits, nuts, vegetables, and a moderate amount of fish and red wine, and tends to be low in meat, dairy, and other alcohol, especially spirits, by the way. So it got its name, of course, because it is the traditional diet in Italy, Greece, some other parts of Mediterranean countries. And to the question, what should I eat? Most of us or all of us should eat the Mediterranean diet. Okay, so how can we put it into practice? In this last part, I want to talk about the shift from nutrient to food. Okay, so it's not that nutrients aren't essential anymore or aren't important. They are. All the things that I said exist, but again, they are not the whole story. I try to show you that it's more complicated than that, and we can't reduce our food only to nutrients. And here I want to show you the concept or the shift that manifested today in food-based dietary guidelines and the transition from evaluating food on the basis of one or two ingredients, calcium, how much calcium, how much iron, how much protein, omega-3, etc. we have. We still do it. We still assess the diet in these tools. But we need to avoid from dividing the food to good and bad food based on these or a single nutrients. For example, milk is good because it contains calcium, okay? Or meat is good because it contains iron, or nuts are bad because it has energy, a lot of calories and a lot of fats. So from zoom in on nutrients, we shift to zoom out on the bigger picture, looking at the whole dietary patterns, and not only dietary patterns, it's also the understanding that food is much more than its components or measurable nutrients. Food is also, and here I add, culture, family, communication, and part of our identity. And if we look at all of this picture, we came to the conclusion that we cannot recommend only how much nutrient do we need, but we need to base our recommendation on food-based dietary guidelines, which consists positive. The idea is to consist positive messages about eating and healthy lifestyle and focus on available foods, portion size, eating behavior. And another important aspect of food-based dietary guideline is the reference to sustainability dimension as well, meaning the understanding that even food and dietary patterns are part of even bigger picture of food systems, which in turn part of even a bigger picture of our planet. Okay, so all of this concept called food-based dietary guidelines, I'll skip that, but if you can see here, just simple and clear reference to eating behavior that it is recommended. So beyond recommending what to eat, which we have in the former slide, but we will skip it because I talked all the last hour and a half about what to eat. Beyond recommending what to eat, we refer to how to eat it, how to be engaged in eating. And you can see the example of the recommendation. One of the principles is that it needs to be simple and clear guidelines. So it's time to remember the promising headlines. I showed you earlier. Okay, and let's consider this argument. Walnut will make you live longer. And let's try to look on it in light of what we learned today. So it's true. The study results are true, and we can live 1 year longer. But we need to remember that FFQ has limitation, and it has limitation in identifying a single food item. We can use it for dietary assessment. We can use it for dietary pattern, but to use FFQ as they used in the study, just to measure one single food items, it's not possible, because every line in the FFQ is a combination of a group of foods. We also must consider the fact that it was an observational research with multiple intervening variables that we cannot control. And maybe another very important fact is that the research was funded by the Walnut Commission of California, or California Walnut Commission, which have interest in these studies. So an important critics about this headline in that such studies that you can see every day in other headlines is that when we put emphasis on one or another food, it's like putting an emphasis on one or another single ingredients. And this kind of studies contribute to the confusion of the public about nutrition. So one day it's walnut, and the other day it's spirulina, and the next day it's goji berry, and we don't know what to eat. And we saw that we know how to evaluate dietary patterns and dietary consumption, but we really don't know until today we don't have good enough tools to measure the contribution of a single food item to the health, because it's much more than that. And also the measure, serving or 5 servings, handful is relative, and there is no way to derive nutritional recommendation from it, from this study or other like this. So to summarize what we can learn from these headlines, and don't get me wrong, I'm all for walnuts. Okay, I eat walnuts, I love walnuts, I support the increase of walnuts in our diet and so on. But I wanted to show you an example of headlines in nutritional study, even that it is good food. It's good food that we embrace, but good food or unhealthy food, these kind of headlines can be misleading in healthy food as in unhealthy food. So to summarize, actually Mario Nessel summarized it better than me. So I'll quote, eat a diet based on a variety of whole and unprocessed foods at an adequate amounts. That's all. And it's great to eat nuts, especially if you like them. And if you don't like them, don't think that you are going to die soon or something like that. Okay, finally, to continue with this take-home message, I love to quote Michael Pollan at the end of nearly every presentation of mine. He's a famous nutrition journalist, and he wrote many books about food and our food systems. And he claims that our food system, in our food system, there are many systematic problems, but the answer to what should we eat is quite simple, and it contains only 3 sentences, which I completely think it's genius to put it in only 3 sentences, and it's the whole story. The first one is eat food and not edible substances. At the beginning of the lecture, I defined food as a nutrient source. Okay, so if it's not nourishing, it's probably edible substances and not food. Ultra-processed foods are edible substances. They are not food. So I don't know, Fringers, you must know Fringers, right? It's for us, nutritionists, is is an edible substances and not food. Okay, so the second sentence is not so much. Of course, according to the body needs, and mostly plants. And these three sentences are the whole story of the human nutrition. So I showed you that it's complicated, but now I claim that it's much more simpler than you think. So with this, I end exactly on time. We have time for questions, so I'll be more than happy to answer questions.
Yes. Any questions for Sigal? I think they got everything, Sigal.
No, I have a lot of questions.
I have one question.
Yeah, so go ahead, maybe one. A lot, but start with one. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's. Did you speak to the 7-day Adventist study? Is that I've heard it's pretty.
Seventh Advent
That's in the-
study?
Seventh day Advent. It's like
Yeah, it's another study.
California,
If you know anything about that study, that's where you want it?
Yeah, I mean, how it relates to the other, I know that there's like some landmark studies, the view that you cited. And I heard that was a pretty good one.
Okay.
I don't remember. I didn't hear the question, but I heard you say the Adventist study or
Yeah.
the Chinese.
If you can mention some of the, I would say, highlights of that research.
I think it's I think it's focused more on a very specific lifestyle, not typically Western lifestyle. Okay, very sagfani. How do you say, Alon? Alon will help me with my very strict. Okay, very strict lifestyle. But the main result or the main conclusion is according to what we know from other population based studies, plant-based, sometimes vegan, less cardiovascular diseases, and there isn't anything new or overwhelming in this study. And the problem is that it's focused in a very specific and with a special characteristic population, which is good because we need more studies to confirm, okay, what we learn from a big, very large population studies. So we have this, we have the also a study in China of a large prospective population.
But it's a valid study and.
Of course it is, yeah.
And
Okay, so Sigal, I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to help us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and enjoy your course.
Thanks, Sigal.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye-bye. So I'll see you all next week.
The-